All right. Welcome, welcome. Very excited to have you all here. Today, Doug is going to be talking to us about food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances. This is especially near and dear to my heart because this is kind of what I built my practice on when I started off. And I still think that it is the most powerful tool that I have in my practice. So, for those of you who don't know Doug, Doug is a nutritional therapy practitioner at our clinic. He has a master's in education, and we're just really excited that he's with us on this journey towards healing. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Well, welcome, folks. Pretty timely topic tonight. Food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances. This has become a huge issue in our culture in the last 30 years. Last 20 or 30 years, seems like everybody has got some sort of food sensitivity these days. And I've talked to people who are claiming they're sensitive to like 60, 70 different foods. I mean, it's almost to the point of like, what do you eat when you get to that point? The interesting thing about food sensitivities and allergies and intolerances is once you get one, it's kind of the segue to really damaging your intestinal health. So you start getting more and more and more. So as soon as you get one, before you know it, you've got two, and then it starts to go downhill from there. So tonight I'm really going to talk about what the differences are between these things, food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances. I'm going to talk about what causes them, what some of the main consequences are of these issues, and then why they're on the rise in the last 20, 30 years, and also how we can identify what your food sensitivities and intolerances are. So that's the roadmap for tonight. If you guys have any questions, just raise your hand as I'm going along. Hopefully we'll have a good chunk of time at the end where you guys can ask any questions that come up. So without further ado, let's kind of dive in here. So the first type of issue is a food allergy. And this is when the body forms an antibody memory against a particular undigested protein that comes into your bloodstream from a specific food. And when you have an IgE antibody form to a particular protein in a food, that triggers what are called mast cells, which release histamine. Typically the response to these antibodies is almost immediate, so when you eat the food immediately you know something's not quite right. And it can potentially build to anaphylactic shock. I mean, when you have a true food allergy like this IgE antibody response is what's known as a true food allergy. And when you have an allergy like this, every time you eat the food, the reaction gets worse. So the body begins to form a memory to this food, and as soon as you eat it, you get a horrible reaction. You pretty much have to avoid this food for potentially your whole life when you get an IgE reaction like this. And laboratory tests are pretty good, from what I understand, at detecting IgE responses. You have a little prick test that people do, and you can also get some blood work done to identify these IgE antibodies in your blood, basically, that are reacting to the specific food. So typically, if you have an allergy like this, you know it, because when you eat the food, you get a reaction immediately, and you just know you got to stay away from that food. So this is a major immune response to a food that you consume. Which is kind of strange. Foods are things that are supposed to be nourishing us. So to have our immune system react to a food as like something with a foreign substance is not good. So we also have another type of issue, food sensitivity. This is also a situation where when you eat a food, your immune system reacts to that food as if it's some kind of pathogen or invader that the body doesn't want. However, food sensitivities are not an immediate response. Typically, you can get some sort of a symptom showing up after you consume a food that you're sensitive to up to 48 hours after you consume that food. So they're a lot more difficult to identify than true food allergy. They're typically mediated by different antibodies in the body. Instead of IgE, IgG or IgM or IgA antibodies are produced in response to this food. And when the immune system is reacting to this food, inflammation is produced. Basically, anytime the immune system responds or reacts to something that either you consume or something that gets into your body, inflammation is generated. That's one of the things that the immune system does to get more immune cells to the site of an infection or something like that. So inflammation is a normal part of your body's immune response. And it should be an acute thing where you get inflamed for a little bit, your immune cells get into the area where the infection is, deal with it, and then the inflammation goes down. But if you're eating a lot of foods that you're sensitive or allergic to, this inflammation becomes chronic in your body. So you've constantly got inflammation because you're constantly eating foods that you're sensitive to. And the other thing with food sensitivities is there's really no reliable laboratory test for food sensitivities. And I was reading an article a couple weeks ago about some guy who, he got a bunch of blood drawn, and then he sent blood off to 3 different labs that do food allergy testing. And every single lab sent him back completely different results. And so it's just like, you hear stories like that, and clearly, these prick tests or evaluating your blood for some of these food sensitivity issues are not very good. You don't get really good information, which is kind of tragic. Somebody goes to a food allergist and gets a test done, and they find out they're allergic to 20 or 30 things, potentially, and they have to stop eating these things. So it's very impactful for your life. So I know Dr. Evan is definitely not a fan of blood testing to identify food sensitivities, and it's definitely not a reliable way to identify these things. So we'll talk about some ways that are somewhat reliable to identify food sensitivities here as we go on. Just a quick note: when you have some sort of an airborne allergy, like a pollen allergy, or some kind of sensitivity to something in the air, it's oftentimes an indication that there's a hidden food allergy or food sensitivity going on. And if it's hidden, it's probably a food sensitivity issue that's happening in your body that's tweaking your immune system. So your immune system's a little out of balance because of this food you continue to eat, and therefore you end up starting to react to something in the air. So just an FYI about that. And then you have food intolerances. Food intolerances are different from sensitivities and allergies in the sense that they don't involve the immune system. So they basically, your body reacts to the food, or you get symptoms when you eat the food, but it's not because your immune system is responding to that food. It's because of some other issue, like for instance lactose. For the term probably lactose intolerance. Lactose is a sugar in milk, and typically people don't have the enzyme lactase which will digest lactose. So when you consume milk, the lactose gets into your lower parts of your small intestine and colon in an undigested form, and then bacteria can begin to break that lactose down, and that causes all sorts of digestive distress, gas, bloating, diarrhea. So it's not that your immune system's responding to the food, it's that you're not digesting it properly for whatever reason, and therefore you have an intolerance towards that particular food. So just a quick shift to this other sheet at the very top of your packet here. Common food allergies and sensitivities. You can see listed, and the big 2 are at the top. These are sort of listed in order of prevalence in the culture. Dairy is the #1 food allergy on planet Earth. Gluten, probably a close second at this point. Present in a lot of different grains, which I've listed here: wheat, rye, barley, oats, spelt, and on down the list. You see, there are many things that people can be allergic or sensitive to, and this is not an exhaustive list. I mean, there's plenty of other foods that people can be sensitive to eating.
I thought oats did not have gluten.
Good question. Oats have a protein. They don't have gluten, but they have a protein that's very similar to gluten. So if you have a really strong gluten allergy, most of the time it's wise to avoid oats as well. But some people, if the gluten sensitivity is not really strong, you can eat oats and you're okay with it. So just be aware that oats also have protein that's very difficult to digest, as well as wheat, rye, and barley and whatnot. So,
and they're highly contaminated
with
gluten.
Often because they're
oftentimes.
stored in the same facility probably as the other grains. And
Right.
they get some of the dust from the wheat wafting over to contaminate the oats or something.
When we say gluten-free oats, what does that really mean?
Well, that means that the oats don't have gluten in them, because if you look at the protein in oats and compare that to gluten, which is a protein, the protein that's in oats is not gluten. It's a different type of protein.
But is there really any difference then between what they say is gluten-free oats versus?
Good question.
Oats.
I don't know the answer to that. Possibly what they're marketing as, quote, gluten-free oats, they've actually tested to verify that there's no gluten contamination. So that could be what's going on. But from my understanding, oats in general do not have gluten in the actual oat. They may be contaminated with gluten.
Or in fields next to wheat or something?
If they're in fields next to wheat, I doubt if they'd be contaminated, because what will contaminate food is if they're stored in the same facility, or they're processed in the same facility as the actual grain, and some of the grains are getting crushed in the processing or whatnot, and some of the dust is wafting over onto the bin of oats.
Or something.
Yeah,
They can
exactly.
be transported too, between, in bulk containers, like rail cars or trucks.
Totally.
They transport straight gluten, which is just a powder.
Mhm.
And then if they don't clean them out, be able to put oats in the next load, they can be contaminated.
Yeah, totally. So there's lots of ways this contamination can happen. But if you have two fields, like an oat field and a wheat field, I don't think there's going to be contamination, because when the wheat is growing, it's the integrity of the wheat grains are preserved in the plant, and they're not being reduced to any kind of a powder yet. So you're not going to get
You can
contamination
buy, you
in
can
that
buy
situation.
oatmeal, Bob's oatmeal like this in a 1 pound bag for like $12 from a certified gluten-free facility. I know you can do that.
Yeah, good. So yeah, I mean, some people can get away with eating oats if you go with oats like that have been tested, certified gluten-free. Yeah, and but just an FYI, they're very challenging. The proteins in oats are pretty challenging to digest as well. So oftentimes people have issues with oats and may not even realize it, even though they think they're eating something that's okay because it's gluten-free. And some of the symptoms, if you have an IgE, true food allergy, the reaction you get by eating the food is instant and it's really strong. You get swelling in your throat, you can't breathe, you break out in hives. It's very unpleasant, and it happens immediately. These food sensitivities, the symptom can show up a couple days later after eating the food, so they're really hard to identify. It's really hard to tune into exactly what's causing the issue. But some of the symptoms you can get when you have one of these food sensitivities, I've listed about 21 symptoms here of some of the symptoms you can get, and these are all basically the result of inflammatory cytokines. These are basically signaling molecules. Part of the immune function is for different cells to communicate with each other, different immune cells, and they communicate with cytokines. Some of these cytokines are inflammatory. So if you get an immune response to a food in an IgA or IgM or IgG food sensitivity context, inflammation is going to happen in your body. And those inflammatory cytokines can produce these sorts of symptoms, which are all really related to inflammation a couple days later. And slightly increased pulse, that's an interesting one. That one can actually be useful. We'll talk about something called the pulse test that you can use to identify these food sensitivities as we go through this. So what causes food allergies and sensitivities? Well, the big two right here at the top, poor digestion and leaky gut. Basically, for your immune system to respond to a food, one of two things have to happen. Well, really both of these things have to happen. The first one is you don't digest the food well. Your immune system responds to undigested proteins. So somewhere along the line, your digestive system is not functioning well. Therefore, you're not digesting the protein in your food well. And therefore, undigested protein is getting into the lower parts of your intestinal tract. So there's virtually no way to get a food allergy or sensitivity if you have like rock solid digestion. Because if your digestion is really good, you're digesting everything pretty darn well, and very little undigested food is reaching the lower part of your intestinal tract. The second thing is leaky gut. And leaky gut is a direct consequence of intestinal dysbiosis, which basically is unfriendly microbes dominating your intestinal ecology. So your intestinal ecology gets out of balance for a variety of reasons, one of which is poor digestion. If you have poor digestion, these undigested food particles getting to the lower part of your intestinal tract are feeding all sorts of unfriendly microbes. Friendly microbes love to eat things like fiber. They don't really do so well when there's a lot of undigested food coming into the lower part of your intestinal tract, because those undigested food particles feed all the unfriendly guys. And when you got things like parasites and candida and all sorts of unfriendly microbes dominating your intestinal ecology, slowly but surely your intestinal wall gets damaged. Your intestinal wall is like one cell thick. It's very fragile. And so, any kind of toxic chemicals, which all these unfriendly microbes and parasites secrete, toxic chemicals, which slowly damage your intestinal tract. So this one cell thick membrane slowly gets holes in it. And this one cell thick membrane in your small intestine is where you absorb your nutrients. So if you slowly get holes forming in this one cell thick membrane, then these undigested food particles that are reaching the lower part of your intestinal tract begin to get into your bloodstream. And then that's a problem, because typically your immune system will respond to that. When you start getting these undigested food particles in your bloodstream, your immune system's like, no, this should not be here, and starts to respond. So those are the two big things: poor digestion and leaky gut. And you can certainly your immune system can get so out of whack it can start attacking everything. I mean, people get autoimmune conditions and whatnot. And certainly a dysfunctional immune system and a stressed immune system can contribute to this food allergy issue. But the main two are poor digestion and leaky gut. If you're like, oh man, I just can't deal with the fact of having to eliminate all these foods that I'm sensitive to for my diet, I'd much rather go to work on trying to heal the cause of the situation, which are poor digestion and leaky gut. So you can do that. You can be like, you know what, I just can't deal with the thought of eliminating all these foods, figuring out what I'm allergic to and eliminating them. Instead, I'm going to really go to work and improve my digestion and heal my leaky gut, and then my food sensitivities are going to hopefully go away slowly. And that will potentially work to some extent. The problem with that is every time you eat something you're sensitive to or allergic to, you get massive amounts of inflammation forming in your GI tract. So remember, your intestinal walls are like one cell thick. So you have two cells in your intestinal tract next to each other, right? And when you're eating food, the nutrition has to get from your intestinal tract into your bloodstream through that one cell thick membrane. And some of those nutrients are absorbed in between the cells and whatnot. So if there's inflammation happening in your intestinal wall, then those cells are just jammed together. And all the mechanisms that transport food, nutrients, from your intestinal tract into your bloodstream are not functioning very well. So every time you eat something you're sensitive to, a lot of inflammation happens, and that prevents good nutrient absorption, and it also prevents healing. Prevents healing your intestinal walls. Inflammation slowly damages your intestinal walls and makes the whole leaky gut situation worse. So if you're like, wow, I'm just going to blow off figuring out what I'm sensitive to, I'm just going to go to work healing my digestion and healing my leaky gut, that's going to be pretty hard to heal a leaky gut situation if you're eating a bunch of foods you're sensitive to. Because it's like you're damaging your intestinal wall over here by eating all these things that are creating inflammation, and you're trying to heal it with certain nutrients over here. You might make some progress slowly, but you're going to make so much better progress if you also eliminate the foods that you're sensitive to temporarily. Because these food sensitivity issues can actually go away. The food allergy issues, once you get an IgE response to a food, it's possible your body can desensitize to that, and you can eventually eat that food again. You certainly got to be really careful with an IgE response because of the whole histamine, can't breathe. I mean, these are pretty serious symptoms. So I would try to retest one of those IgE response foods very gingerly, if at all. But the food sensitivity issues, the ones that show up a couple days later potentially after you eat the food, those ones are healable. You just simply have to improve your digestion, so you're digesting your food properly again, and heal that leaky gut situation. And then you're going to be able to go back to eating that food again, because if you're digesting the food properly and your gut has no holes, then no undigested protein from that food is going to get in your blood, so your immune system's not going to respond to that food. So you can certainly eat those foods again, but you've really got to do some work to heal your digestion and repair that leaky gut. And you can do that work most effectively by temporarily eliminating those foods that you may be sensitive to. So some of the consequences of food allergies, when you eat foods that you're sensitive or allergic to, what happens? Well, one of the things that happens is weight gain. Because when you get all these undigested food particles entering your blood, and then your immune system's secreting antibodies to attach to these undigested food particles, you end up with all these circulating immune complexes of the undigested food and the antibodies attached to it circulating around your blood. Your liver should be able to clear those out of your bloodstream. One of the 500 different jobs of your liver is cleaning your blood. But our livers are typically really stressed out these days in the modern world. And it doesn't take much these days to overly stress our liver, and our liver starts to fall behind in its job of cleaning the blood. And so these circulating immune complexes start to deposit in various places throughout your body. Your body typically stuffs them into fat cells, basically, to get them out of the circulation. And so you start to gain weight, basically, when you consume things you're sensitive to. And also you can get autoimmune conditions happening, because as your body's stuffing these circulating immune complexes into the tissues of your body, well, your immune system is still attacking these things, and if they're stuffed into various tissues throughout your body, it's a great way to get an autoimmune condition going. So one of the most important things to do when you've got an autoimmune condition is address your food sensitivities, so you can minimize that issue. Some other things, systemic inflammation throughout your body, leading to a wide variety of symptoms, which are on the list that we just talked about here, the symptoms at the bottom of this list. So, inflammation is like the root cause of pretty much all degenerative disease. So reducing inflammation in our body is one of the critical things that we have to do to really get healthy. Chronic or acute inflammation, which is what your immune system does when it's trying to heal you from an infection, is a good thing. You want that. You want the ability to inflame to help you get over an infection more quickly. But if this inflammation becomes chronic, then that starts to contribute to tissue destruction in your body, which leads to degenerative disease over time. So we definitely don't want that. Food allergies and sensitivities also further compromise digestion, mainly because of the inflammation that's generated when you consume something you're sensitive to. Inhibits the production of hydrochloric acid in your stomach, inhibits the secretion of digestive enzymes. So all the digestive juices that help you digest food are inhibited, and therefore your digestion gets even worse. Which leads to what? More food sensitivities, which leads to more poor digestion. So it's like this vicious cycle. This is how one food allergy leads to another, and you suddenly, before you know it, you're allergic to 60 things, and you're like, what can I eat? And there's unfortunately a lot of people out there that are in that situation. Malnutrition, and we talked a little bit about this already. If you've got all this inflammation in your GI tract, the transport mechanisms that transport nutrients from your intestinal tract into your bloodstream don't work very well. And so every time you consume something you're sensitive to, you don't absorb a whole lot of nutrition from that meal, because all this inflammation happens in your GI tract. Gallbladder problems, oftentimes the little bile duct that dumps the bile fluids that are released from the gallbladder into your intestinal tract dumps right into your duodenum. That little opening right there where that bile duct dumps into your intestinal tract gets caught up in all the inflammation that's being generated by these food sensitivities, so the bile has a hard time getting through into your intestinal tract. So the bile fluids back up into your gallbladder and start to get stagnant in there. And then slowly but surely gallstones are formed, you get infection in your gallbladder, and 600,000 gallbladder surgeries a year approximately in this country. This is a big contributing factor to this. Low-fat diet is another big contributing factor.
How do you diagnose malnutrition clinically?
Well, you come into the clinic like this and get some blood work done. There's a test we run called NutriVal that identifies all different sorts of nutrients that you can be deficient in. So that's one way.
A conventional medicine would look at an albumin or a pre-albumin, right? As
For
far as
protein.
diagnosing a malnutrition problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what conventional physicians would use, but albumin, if your albumin is low, that certainly can be an indication that you're not digesting protein well. Yeah, but there's all sorts. I mean, really, there's micronutrients are the real critical things that people are deficient in these days. I mean, B vitamins and vitamin D,
So you
minerals.
could just look at somebody and say, oh, you're malnourished, could you? Because there's...
You could if you really knew how to diagnose just by, white spots on the nails, possible indication of zinc deficiency. There's a number of signs in the body that you can really tune into if you're really perceptive and understand what the results are of certain nutritional deficiencies and say, wow, you're probably deficient in blah, blah, blah. Something along those lines, like bumps along the back of your upper arm, that's typically vitamin A deficiency. So there's definitely some marker signs, but some nutrients you wouldn't know unless you do a blood test.
How rampant is malnutrition?
I would say macronutrients, not a whole lot of malnutrition happening in the United States. Possibly protein. Certainly deficiency in essential fatty acids, especially omega-3s, can be pretty prevalent in our culture. But micronutrient deficiency, I would say virtually 100% of Americans have some level of micronutrient deficiency going on.
Can you
So.
describe what you're talking about, macro and micro?
Sure, yeah. Macronutrients are protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Those are the nutrients that our body basically burns for energy and uses in various structural, produce certain structural parts of our body. Micronutrients, things like minerals, typically function as cofactors in enzymatic reactions, so they help our body run properly, and they can certainly form structure as well, like our bones with calcium. Vitamins are basically coenzymes. They work with enzymes to make certain metabolic processes run in our body. So minerals, vitamins, phytonutrients, enzymes, antioxidants, these are the micronutrients. They're needed in very small quantities, whereas macronutrients needed in large quantities by our body. But typically, because our soil is so depleted in our country and really throughout the world, most of our food is dramatically deficient in minerals, and the foods are not producing vitamins very well because they don't have the nutrition to really run their own metabolic processes properly, and they're just very deficient in vitamins as well. And then you get things like picking fruit, 2 weeks before it's ripe in Chile to ship it to the United States so that it's picked green and it doesn't go bad in transport. So the fruit doesn't have the opportunity to absorb all the minerals and vitamins it needs from the tree or the vine, whatever it's grown on. So yeah, we are dramatically deficient in micronutrients in this culture, and most of the work we do at this clinic is related to the fact that people have significant micronutrient deficiencies of one form or another.
So, Doug, you were
Yeah.
saying that a low-fat diet contributes to
Absolutely.
to
Gallbladder issues.
really
Because,
low-fat.
yeah, well, I mean, certainly unhealthy fats can contribute to gallbladder issues, but so can low fat, because of the fact that the fat triggers a hormone once the fat hits your duodenum that tells your gallbladder to squeeze and release the bile fluid that it's holding. And so if you eat low fat, that hormone really never gets triggered. And so the gallbladder just sits there with the bile. And the bile is basically a fluid that's produced in the liver, and a lot of the toxins that the liver's cleaning out of the blood get dumped into the bile, and the bile then gets shunted into the gallbladder and just waits for the fat to come into the intestinal tract when the gallbladder squeezes as a result of that hormonal trigger, and then the gallbladder dumps its bile into the intestinal tract, which helps you digest fats. But if you eat low fat, the gallbladder never gets that trigger, and slowly but surely your gallbladder gets stagnant and toxic. So that's the low fat approach. I could do a whole class. In fact, I think I am doing a whole class on fats, and sometime in May or something like that. Because I mean, this whole low fat thing, don't get me going on that. I think I'm going to go off on that in May, so come to that class if you want to get re-educated on that. Okay, so what else? Autoimmune conditions, we already talked about. Adrenal fatigue, another consequence of food allergies. When you eat something you're sensitive to, you get all this inflammation happening in your body. When you got a lot of chronic inflammation, your adrenal glands are constantly working to bring down that inflammation, because one of the adrenal hormones is cortisol, and cortisol is anti-inflammatory. And so the poor adrenal glands are constantly at work trying to bring down inflammation in your body if you've got all this inflammation going on. So, and then your adrenal glands get fatigued, and then you feel horrible. Now, one of the easiest ways to feel horrible is to burn out your adrenal glands. So why are food sensitivities and allergies on the rise? I would pretty much say life in the modern world. And this is the last 20 or 30 years, these things have just gone through the roof. Everybody's sensitive to something these days. And part of that may be we're just more aware of the situation. So that's a part of it. But I think the bigger part of it is the fact that our digestive health has gone down the toilet, so to speak. And we've got IBS, Crohn's, colitis, gastritis, on and on and on. People with celiac, people are just dealing with so much GERD, acid reflux. People are not digesting their food well, and this is the main issue. And part of that equation is GMOs. One of the easiest way to damage your intestinal health is consuming a bunch of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. There are certain plants that are genetically modified so they produce their own pesticides, so that the insects can't eat them, or if they do, they die. So they don't have to be sprayed. But when you eat those foods, it's been shown that these genetically modified organisms can transfer their DNA to our intestinal flora, our intestinal bacteria. So now you've got intestinal bacteria living in your gut that are producing pesticides 24/7. What a great way to really just shred the health of your intestinal wall and get that leaky gut going on. Also, GMOs are producing very strange proteins that have never before been seen in the food supply. And these are very easily proteins that our immune system will react to and create a food sensitivity. So if you're really interested in avoiding GMOs, quick tip, go organic. Only eat organically grown foods. That's not going to eliminate all the GMOs in your diet, but it's going to eliminate the vast majority of GMOs in your diet. Processed foods, there's a lot of sensitivities these days to food flavorings, colors and preservatives and additives. Mainly because they create changes in some of the molecules in our body that our immune system reacts to those changes. So people can be sensitive to these weird chemicals that are in food these days. Poor intestinal ecology, this is the big one. When you get poor intestinal ecology, you end up with leaky gut. When you get unfriendly microbes living in your intestinal tract, they slowly damage your intestinal wall integrity. You get leaky gut, you start getting food allergies. What damages intestinal ecology? Well, pesticides and herbicides, so going organically grown is a great way to help mitigate that issue. Various medications will also damage your intestinal ecology. Painkillers, natural or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, antacids. A lot of these, like NSAIDs, will actually eat a hole in your stomach and or intestinal tract over time. If people are doing aspirin for heart health and whatnot, great way to get an ulcer. These things literally contribute to leaky gut. Antibiotics obviously change your intestinal ecology over time, as do birth control pills. Chlorine and fluoride kill friendly bacteria and allow unfriendly microbes to start to take over. Pesticides and pharmaceuticals in tap water. So you definitely should not be drinking tap water because you're going to end up with food allergies slowly but surely if you do that. Not to mention many other things because of the chemicals that are in tap water. Antibiotics in meat and dairy. If you're eating factory farmed animals or dairy products, you're consuming massive amounts of antibiotics every time you consume these things because these animals are so unhealthy in these factory farms because they're not allowed to eat their natural diet. And so to keep them alive, to prevent massive infection from killing these animals, they got to pump them full of tons of antibiotics. And they found that also that this improves weight gain, so they actually have more meat to sell, but it's certainly not healthy meat. And so you definitely, I would go down to the little farm fresh market there on Black Lake Boulevard and buy all my meat and dairy products there. Because everything in there is locally produced from farmers who are basically grass-fed animals, and there's no antibiotics in any of that stuff. So definitely be very careful with the meat and dairy products you purchase, because this is a huge issue. I mean, a lot of the conventional milk is full of pus because there's infections in the bladder of the cow. I mean, it's just disgusting. So just stay away from factory farmed animals and dairy products.
Pus and eating doesn't work.
What'd you say?
You need to not talk about pus and eating food.
Yeah, seriously. So stress totally tweaks your, when you're stressed, you don't secrete digestive fluids. You know, your body, stress is a fight or flight thing, and you don't digest when you're stressed. So if you don't digest your food, much higher prevalence of food allergies. Refined carbs and sugar, you know, these things feed unfriendly microbes. A great way to get intestinal dysbiosis and leaky gut. Alcohol, caffeine, and cigarettes damage intestinal ecology and therefore produce leaky gut. Artificial preservatives can damage intestinal ecology. Radiation, chemotherapy, and x-rays. Mercury-contained dental fillings slowly leach mercury into your mouth that you then swallow, and that damages your intestinal ecology. Carbonated beverages, not so great for your friendly flora either. Also, sugar and refined carb consumption cause inflammation and immune distress in your body, which can contribute to food allergies. An imbalance in your essential fatty acid ratio can create excess inflammation in your body, and that means eating too much omega-6s and not enough omega-3s. That can tend to trigger these IgE reactions a little more prevalently. There's also something called the hygiene theory. This one I find really interesting. It flows from the fact that if you look at third world countries, there's very little food sensitivity, food allergy issues going on. But in first world countries like the United States, this is an epidemic. So what the heck's up with that? Well, the theory goes that, you know, back in the day, 10,000 years ago, when we were harvesting our vegetables from the forest, picking them wild, we wouldn't really wash our vegetables very thoroughly. We'd eat a lot of dirt, basically. And in fact, all the indigenous cultures consumed some dirt as like part of their diet. They literally ate dirt, a lot of these people. So there's soil-based microbes in dirt. And these days, instead of playing in the dirt, kids are on their computers, right? So we're just not exposed to dirt. And we've had a relationship with these soil-based microbes for eons, the human species. And they're a big part of our intestinal ecology and a big part of the intelligence of our immune system. They literally teach our immune system about our environment. So when we become deficient in these things, because of the fact that we're just so hyper clean all the time, we basically sell our immune system short and tend to get more food allergies. Lack of vitamin D production. We're not out in the sun like we used to be thousands of years ago. And that can contribute to immune dysfunction and food allergies. C-section births and formula feeding. These are, you know, when you're basically, you should be born through the vaginal canal because you basically get a download of all sorts of friendly bacteria from your mother's vaginal canal. When that happens, that jumpstarts your healthy intestinal ecology. So if you get a C-section, that doesn't happen. Also, when you're fed formula, you know, mother's milk has a lot of friendly bacteria in it as well. It also has the colostrum, that first milk, that basically stimulates the growth of friendly bacteria dramatically. So when these things don't happen, you start off life in not so great a shape in terms of your intestinal health. And then early weaning on the solid foods. You know, I've heard stories of people feeding, you know, grains to their babies like, you know, 3 months old or something like that. This is, you know, the digestive system is not fully ready for foods like that at such a young age. And so, you know, the integrity of the intestinal wall is not fully formed. Much easier for undigested food particles from that wheat to get into the bloodstream and begin to form this whole allergy issue. Pasteurization of milk. You know, cow's milk, biggest food allergy on planet Earth when it's pasteurized. Because cow's milk has about 4 different protein fractions that humans can't digest. We don't have the enzymes to digest it. If the milk is raw, it comes with its own enzymes that will help you digest those protein fractions. And therefore it won't be a food sensitivity issue. But if the milk is pasteurized, you destroy the enzymes. Now those 4 protein fractions you don't have enzymes for, you got no hope of digesting. So those 4 protein fractions are high potential for stimulating a food allergy sensitivity situation. Vaccinations are correlated. The more vaccinations a child gets, the more likely as an adult they are to have food sensitivities. Potentially because vaccinations really tweak your immune system. I mean, our immune system is multi-layered. When you get a vaccination, you take a highly, usually multiple strains of a pathogen and insert it directly into your body's inner sanctum, the bloodstream. So especially when it's a young child's immune system is not fully formed, and the immune system can overreact, you know, and you can use a very large percentage of your immune function at a young age like that and totally tweak your immune system for the rest of your life potentially. So that could potentially be why vaccinations are correlated with more food sensitivities, but you know, correlation is not necessarily causation, so I don't really know what the mechanism is for sure in that situation. Dehydration can contribute to food allergies because it leads to excess histamine production. Poor nutrition, you know, if you don't have good nutrition, you don't have the nutrients to make hydrochloric acid or digestive enzymes, so your digestion's not good. It also causes poor immune function when you don't have good nutrition. It also causes leaky gut when you don't have good nutrition. And so these are things that cause food allergies. So when you have poor nutrition, you're set up for food allergies, and then the food allergies lead to more poor nutrition. Another one of those catch-22 loops. This is a big one. Antacids, H2 blockers, and protein pump inhibitors. People taking these things, what do? They neutralize stomach acid, or they prevent stomach acid from being formed. So if you're not making stomach acid, well, guess what you need to digest protein? Stomach acid. So if you're not making stomach acid, you're not digesting protein. If you're not digesting protein, you get a lot of undigested protein getting into the lower part of your intestinal tract that has the potential to get into your bloodstream and trigger a food sensitivity.
Could you give some examples of what H2 blocker, just like a common drug?
Yeah, H2 blockers, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm not super knowledgeable about all these pharmaceuticals, but proton pump things like Prilosec and Nexium, antacids, things like Tums. You might know some H2 blockers, Evan.
Zantac is a big one.
There you go.
Ranitidine.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. So basically, you know, people take these things because of acid reflux. You know, they think if they get this acid reflux burning their esophagus, they have too much stomach acid. It's usually the opposite. It's usually you have too little stomach acid. And so the traditional MD will prescribe an acid or a proton pump inhibitor for an acid reflux situation, and that will in fact solve this problem in terms of, you know, quelching the symptom, because now you got no stomach acid, so when the food refluxes, you don't get the burning. But it certainly doesn't, it creates a lot of long-term problems in your body, because now you're not digesting your food. And all this undigested food is going into your intestinal tract, which slowly shreds the health of your intestinal tract. So this is the disaster for your health long-term. How can we identify these food sensitivities and allergies? We already talked about the fact that blood testing is not, it's somewhat reliable for the IgE true food allergy, apparently. Would you concur with that, Evan?
I would.
Okay. Food sensitivities, however, these other antibodies, IgE, or rather, I'm sorry, IgG, IgA, IgM, the blood and prick testing are not very accurate. So the bottom line is we've got to come up with some other things to identify. And the gold standard for identifying a food sensitivity is the food elimination diet. And basically this is you go on an elimination diet. You eliminate the foods that you think you're sensitive to from your diet. And initially when you do that, you might experience some pretty interesting symptoms. You might not feel so good for the first week you're doing that. Because, you know, oftentimes what we're sensitive to, we're actually addicted to on some level. So you experience withdrawal symptoms for the first couple days. In fact, if there's a food, I hate to tell you guys this, but if there's a food, you're like, oh my God, I could never give that up. I love that so much. There's no way I could ever stop eating that. Most likely that's something you're sensitive to. Because when we eat these things that we're sensitive to, one of the things that happens is we get a little bit of an endorphin release from that. And that endorphin is this feel-good chemical that helps us avoid feeling pain and stimulates like runner's high. That's an endorphin-mediated psychological state. So it feels good to some extent. And when we come off these things, we have withdrawal symptoms, and we don't feel good. But after about a week of that, you should start to feel a lot better on an elimination diet, because suddenly all this inflammation is going down in your body. And all these symptoms that are being produced from inflammation are starting to mitigate. And you're feeling better. But then after about 3 weeks of going on this elimination diet where you're eliminating suspected food allergies, then you start to reintroduce them. And you reintroduce them one by one to test the food, basically. And it's really wise, while you're doing this elimination diet, to adopt a highly anti-inflammatory protocol in your diet and in your supplement plan. Because if you're someone who, because you're eating a lot of foods you're sensitive to and a lot of other issues going on, maybe an essential fatty acid imbalance, you got all sorts of chronic inflammation in your body. You can think of that as you've got this really loud music playing all the time in your body, tons of inflammation. And if you're someone like that, you got all this inflammation and you're going on this elimination diet, and you still have massive inflammation even though you're reducing a lot of these food sensitivities because you've got inflammation for other reasons. And then you start to feel a little better maybe, but as you reintroduce these foods, if you've already got this massive inflammation, you're not really going to notice much difference. It's kind of like, you know, you've got this loud music playing in your ear and you do something that reduces the music a little bit and then you start doing that thing again 3 weeks later, adding in that food, and the music goes up, but it's not that different. So it's really hard to tell if you were sensitive to that food. So the thing to do is go on an elimination diet, reduce or eliminate what you think you're sensitive to, and at the same time adopt a highly anti-inflammatory protocol that brings inflammation way down in your body. Now, after 3 weeks, when you start testing these foods by reintroducing them, if you eat something you're sensitive to, it's going to generate inflammation. And because you don't have much inflammation in your body, it's going to be really easy to hear, so to speak, that sensitive food and notice the symptoms that come up because you suddenly went from very little inflammation to significant inflammation because you just ate something you're sensitive to. Does that make sense? Does that, you guys follow me there? So that's kind of how this elimination diet works ideally. You couple eliminating the foods you think you're sensitive to with an anti-inflammatory protocol, and then you slowly reintroduce these foods. And you reintroduce them one at a time, and then you just wait for 2 to 3 days after you test the food to see if you get a symptom. And then after 2 or 3 days, if you didn't get a symptom, then you test the next food. And you just keep doing that, and when you get symptoms, you know you're sensitive to that food. And then you know that that's a food you have to avoid for the time being. Yeah.
Should you ease in on, I mean, so like just a little nibble of cheese or something like that?
No, you should eat significant amounts of what you're testing. 3 times a day, ideally.
Wow. So
Go for it. Yeah, you want to find out. You want to get a significant, you want to generate a significant symptom. So you're like, yeah, I'm definitely sensitive to that food. So you go for it. After 3 weeks not eating that food, you go for it. And to see, and if you don't experience a symptom within 2 or 3 days after eating that food, then you know you're probably not sensitive to that food. You can keep eating that food. But if you do get a symptom, you're going to hear it, you're going to feel it, because you've reduced inflammation with the anti-inflammatory protocol. And you're going to eat significant amounts of that food, so you're going to get a really loud symptom. And you're going to then have identified something you're sensitive to.
So it isn't that you need to like regrow the culture in your gut to handle the things. They're always there. It's just, so that's what I was wondering, maybe you need to ease into it. Like give it a little bit, try to regrow the things that may eat that type of food.
It's not so much that, it's just that your immune system has become trained to react to certain proteins in that food. And so you in eliminating that food, you've basically, your body has kind of, the inflammation has started to come down. And so
the microbes, whatever else in your gut are still the same set.
to some extent, when you change your diet, the whole microbial balance in your gut starts to change. I mean, you know, if you look at the microbial intestinal ecology of a meat eater, compare that to somebody who's a vegetarian, it's going to be totally different intestinal ecology. There's going to be some commonalities. There's definitely going to be different strains because the bacteria that end up growing in our gut are the ones that are optimal for the food that's coming in. So yeah, if you change your diet dramatically, you're going to shift that intestinal ecology slowly. But really what you're looking for is to get your intestinal ecology healthy in terms of being dominated by soil-based organisms and lactobacillus species like Acidophilus and bifidus, so that when that's happening, your leaky gut starts to heal. If the friendly bacteria are dominating your intestinal ecology, the leaky gut starts to go away. And then there's no holes in your intestinal tract. Even if you would get some undigested food getting down there, it's got no way to get into your blood, so you're not going to get an immune response. And then a lot of your symptoms are going to go away because your inflammation is reducing in your body.
So when you go gung-ho, then you would go gung-ho day 1 and day 2?
Go gung-ho for 1 day with that food.
Just 1 day?
Just for 1 day.
And then wait 2 days more?
And then you stop eating that food and you wait for a couple more days to see if you get a symptom.
Okay.
And then after 2 or 3 days of waiting, time to test the next food. And if you do get a symptom, then you know you're sensitive to it, you put that food in your list of things to avoid, and you let your symptoms calm down before you test the next food. Okay, you got a question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood what you meant by anti-inflammatory protocol.
Well, that's basically, there's all those different sorts of things you can do to reduce inflammation in your body. You can stop eating sugar, you can balance out your omega-3s and 6s, you can take an antioxidant. So basically, I think I've developed like 20 to 25 things that people can do to reduce inflammation, chronic inflammation in their body. And I give that list to people, and I'm like, do as many of these things as you can do, as many of these things that are comfortable for you to do while you're on this elimination diet. Because elimination diet is not necessarily super comfortable. If you've changed your diet, now you get this whole anti-inflammatory protocol. Oh my God, here's another 25 things I have to do. So just do as much of that as you can, and then slowly but surely your inflammation is going to come down. And by the time 3 weeks, you're really ready to test some foods.
Yeah.
Because the inflammation is down there, and if you do get inflammation generated by eating something you're sensitive to, you're going to know it. You're going to get a pretty loud symptom.
So there are 23 things on this list. Are you suggesting
23 things
eliminating all of them?
No.
I mean, that seems to be really a difficult thing.
Yes, so if you're looking for, totally, if you're looking for, here's the big ones. The big ones are dairy, gluten, eggs, peanuts, chocolate tends to be a big one. Well, that's kind of hard for you guys to hear on that. Soy is a big one. And corn tends to be a big one. So these are the things that I would basically, if you do an elimination diet with just those 6 things, you're going to really get some good information. Because most people have one of those 6 they're sensitive to. So that's probably a good place to start. There's other things you can do though to tune in to what you might be sensitive to. There's a little protocol I give people called a pulse test. See, when you eat a food you're sensitive to, your taste buds are connected to your brain via various nerve signals, and your brain knows. Your brain knows what's coming in. If you're eating something you're sensitive to, your brain knows it almost immediately. And it typically alerts your adrenal glands as to, hey, power up the systems, we got invaders coming in. And your adrenal glands start to secrete stress hormones to prepare your body to deal with incoming pathogens, basically. And these stress hormones increase your heartbeat. So typically, eat something you're sensitive to, your heartbeat's going to go up. So there's a little protocol you can do called a pulse test, where you basically take your pulse for a full minute when you're relaxed, and then you take your pulse again for a full minute when you've got a food you suspect you're sensitive to in your mouth, and you're tasting it. So you chewed it up enough so you taste it. And you just let it sit there, you don't swallow it. And you take your pulse again for a full minute and write that number down and compare it to your pulse when you're just at rest and normal without any food in your mouth. If your pulse has gone up by 4 to 6 beats per minute, that's sort of a little bit of a red flag zone. Something's going on with that food that's not ideal. 6 beats or more per minute, you're sensitive to that food. So the thing is that pulse test is not totally accurate, because here's why it couldn't be accurate. Here's one of the reasons why it couldn't be accurate. You're testing your sacred food that you could never give up. And you're sitting there like... Stress, exactly. Your heartbeat's going to go up. So that's one way it could not be a valid result. Another way it could not be valid is you have adrenal fatigue. Your adrenals are shot, right? A lot of people these days have adrenal fatigue. It's very common. And so if your adrenals are, down here with just enough energy, they're laying on the floor, they can't even stand up, just enough energy to kind of raise an eyebrow. That's about all the energy your adrenals have. And you're like, put this sensitive food in your mouth. You go, okay, adrenals, let me know. Am I sensitive to this food? Your adrenals are like, whatever. And they go, turn around and go back to sleep. You're not going to get any stress hormones secreted because your adrenals just don't have the energy. So, that pulse test, be aware of its limitations, but I like to use the pulse test on this list of 23 things to find out, get some ideas about what I might be sensitive to, and as to what to include in my elimination diet. So the results you get from this pulse test are not definitive. There's a pretty good chance you're sensitive to what you're reacting to with that pulse test, but it's not definitive for some of the reasons we talked about. So just use that pulse test to start to tune in, to start to get some ideas about what to put on your elimination diet. And the big 6 that I mentioned, I would recommend, no matter what, putting those on your elimination diet. And just use the pulse test possibly to tune into some of the other things on this list to test as to whether you may or may not be sensitive to and add them to your elimination diet. And when you're doing your elimination diet, once you identify the things you're sensitive to, you got to cut them out for a period of time. You got to quit eating them. And then you go to work healing your digestion and healing your intestinal walls. And slowly but surely your life turns around because you're addressing these food sensitivities. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on muscle testing for food sensitivity?
I think muscle testing can be awesome. The thing is, you have to have a really good muscle tester because the muscle tester has to be, their ego has to be totally out of the equation. They can't have any agenda at all. That's kind of a hard state. You almost got to be like enlightened to do good muscle testing. So if you can find someone who's really enlightened and really has no agenda or investment in what the results are of the test, and then yeah, you can go with that. But personally, I would use muscle testing like the pulse test. Just find a good muscle tester, get tested on go home with a list of what they say you're sensitive to, and then do an elimination diet. Because the elimination diet will give you definitive 100% certainty, virtually 100% certainty of what you're sensitive to. So that's the only gold standard that I know of. But yeah, I think muscle testing, you can get some great information on muscle testing if you got a really good muscle tester. So if you got somebody like that in your life, definitely put them to work.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's hard for you to be that person testing yourself, right? Because you got an investment. You want, you love this food. Do you want to be sensitive to it? No. So, and it's really difficult. So,
how close is turkey to chicken in terms of the food sensitivities?
Well, good question. I would say it's probably in the same ballpark, but I don't know for sure. Chicken is just, I think people eat more chicken than turkey in our culture, so there's probably more chicken sensitivities for that reason. But the protein in turkey and the protein in chicken are probably pretty comparable in terms of how difficult they are to digest. So most likely it's a similar situation. By the way, another way you can get really sensitive to a food is to eat it every day. Eat the same food over and over and over again is a great way to get sensitive to foods. So the healthiest thing to do is to rotate your foods constantly. You're never really eating the same thing day after day. You're not constantly rotating your foods. And that's a great way to stay away from food allergies and sensitivities. So, if your digestion is rock solid and your intestinal ecology is spot on, you can probably get away with eating the same food every day and not have an issue. But it's a rare person that I meet these days whose digestion is rock solid and their intestinal ecology is spot on. So it's wise for modern humans to eat a varied diet. Yeah.
Is there a point at which I could determine that I've been eating peanut butter so many years, easily over 20, almost every day. I haven't had a problem so far.
Okay.
I've gone off it for a month because of dental surgery, and I've come back to it and I didn't notice any difference. And that was recently. Do you think it's just, the 20 and then You'll be in trouble.
Well, it's hard to say because you might have a lot of chronic inflammation in your body, so it's hard for you to notice much of a difference when you do go back to that peanut butter after eliminating for 20 days. There's already so much inflammation. Remember, inflammation is what's causing these symptoms that people get from eating a food they're sensitive to. So if you've already got so much inflammation, then you go back eating peanut butter. It's like you took one stick out of the fire, then you put it back in, you're not going to notice much difference in the fire. You know, you're still going to, so the thing to do is an elimination diet. And then do an anti-inflammatory protocol concurrently, and then reintroduce peanut butter, and see if you notice anything at that point. If you don't notice anything at that point, then yeah, it's time to say, hey, I can eat peanut butter. But you might, if I were you, if I was somebody who's been eating peanut butter for 20 years, I'd go home and do a pulse test on peanut butter tonight.
Huge investment in it.
Yeah, I understand. But you know, almond butter is a nice tasting thing too, and peanuts, yeah, I would encourage organic peanut butter because conventionally grown peanut butter has a tendency to be contaminated with aflatoxins, which is a mold that can cause some issues in the body. So organic peanut butter is much less, typically much less contaminated. So, but yeah, peanut butter can be fine.
What
As long as
happens?
you're not sensitive to
What
it.
happens if you do the detox cleanse thing for 3 weeks or 21 days, whatever?
This is the thing we're doing in March here at the clinic?
Well, we did it last. When did we do that, Susan?
Last September.
Last
We
September.
did the thorn research one.
We did the Thorn Research Mediclear
Okay.
Plus, and we reintroduced everything. This going like you've been saying. One day and then don't eat it for 3 days or so to see if. What if you never get a big reaction, but you know that you have food allergies? When you go back to eating everything, you end up having some of the like that after you eat, but you didn't notice anything when you were reintroducing stuff.
Well, then I'd want to see the what you're eating when you did the elimination diet. Possibly you didn't reduce inflammation enough in your body. You
Okay.
didn't have a good enough anti-inflammatory protocol.
Okay.
And possibly, how did you reintroduce it? Did you eat significant amounts of it for a day, or? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did because I
Yeah.
thought, oh boy.
So if you're not getting significant symptoms on an elimination diet like that, then that tells me that you may have food sensitivities, but they're not like, major food sensitivities. They're just a slight immune response possibly to the foods that you're eating. And so then in that case, I would go to work on improving your digestion and working to rebuild your intestinal health, and then that should clear up whatever residual food sensitivities you got going
When I
on.
was a child, I did this scratch test for food allergies, and I was allergic to everything.
Well, remember, that scratch test is not super accurate.
Right. But I mean, now that I see that, but that was so. I did have some food allergies, I know, and I know that I have them now because every time I can't even pinpoint what it is that I eat, but I get the congestion right here in the top
Sure.
of my esophagus,
Sure.
you're clearing your throat, and then sometimes you get the bloated, so you're eating something you shouldn't be eating.
Yeah, I mean, bloating, yeah, Gavin, you got something to say about that?
Yeah, so sometimes it can be a combination of foods.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're eating a sandwich, whatever's in the sandwich and on the sandwich. The other thing is that sometimes it can take I've seen up to 7 days of a reaction after eating a particular food.
Oh, really?
So sometimes that muddies thing, if you're introducing something every 4 days, and then you've introduced the next thing, you might be reacting to that first thing and you're not realizing it. So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
so you just need to do the diet again, and then, for another 21 days. Right?
Yeah, well, maybe then when I reintroduce, goes a week
Right.
before I reintroduce anything else.
Right.
Well, I remember when we did it, and eggs were the first thing we introduced because I wanted an egg for breakfast, but we didn't eat eggs all day long that first day.
Yeah.
So it's not like we really overdid that particular item. So maybe we were allergic to it or sensitive to it and didn't realize it.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. But even if you just ate it for one meal and you didn't have a strong reaction, you're probably not super sensitive to that food. Maybe a little bit, but yeah, definitely if you do it again, each of the meals in the day, you include that food. So
But
you
if
have a really good, solid test. that
Okay,
way.
going along with that, if you were only slightly sensitive to the foods, but you combined a whole bunch of slightly sensitivities together in different foods, and that could make more of a combined reaction, maybe. Is that true, or?
I suppose, but then it'll be hard to discern which
Yeah.
food you're actually
Right.
sensitive to.
But I'm just saying, we don't feel like when we reintroduce one food that we got a big reaction, but then when you go back to eating kind of what you've been eating or trying to eat better and stuff, but you're still eating a variety of foods, that were on your list before.
Right.
Now you,
The combination thing.
yeah, so you have the combination thing that muddies up the whole thing. That just goes.
It's challenging. I mean, this whole foods. Honestly, you don't want to get into this situation.
Yeah.
You don't want to get into this situation where you're reacting to a lot of it. It's not fun to dig yourself out of that.
Mhm.
It's not easy.
Right.
You know, and there's lots of different pieces to take into account. You know, you really got to work on the cause, which is poor digestion and leaky gut. At the same time, you're trying to figure out what your food sensitivities are and eliminate them from your diet. And you may not get all your food sensitivities. You just may not be able to figure it all out. And so you're still eating a few things you're sensitive to, but at least you've identified some of them and reduced a significant amount of them, so you've brought inflammation way down. That's going to allow the work you're doing to rebuild your digestion and prepare your intestinal wall to proceed much more effectively. So you just do the best you can, and you know, you don't stress about the process as best as possible, because stress contributes to the issue. You know.
Exactly.
I wanted to make a comment on one thing you said about hygiene. What was it? Hygiene theory or something.
Yeah.
My mother and my grandmother had different philosophies on what little boys should be doing. My mother was, wash your hands, don't pick that up off the floor and eat it. Also, my grandmother was the total opposite, and she would say, the kids got to eat so much dirt before they grow up so they'll be healthy. And so it was really interesting when you said that, because then we don't get the stuff out of the dirt, you know, that is healthy for us, or helps us build up things so that we can fight things naturally without being all the added stuff.
Totally. And
So
in the third world,
really
the kids aren't like sitting
Yeah.
around and playing on their computer all day long.
Right.
They're out playing in the dirt out in the woods.
Yeah.
And they don't have this food sensitivity issue. So, I mean, once again, correlation is not causation necessarily, but I think that it's a big piece of the equation. So, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely an advocate for getting kids out and playing in the woods. You know, just get them out in nature. Yeah.
One of the really interesting studies coming out now is about whipworms, pig whipworms. There's some research being done at Tufts, and one of the things they're seeing is that when you have a parasite such as that in your system, like they do in Africa and other third world countries, that it's an immune modulator, and that it'll heal the gut, and actually it'll decrease the overall inflammation, and you won't have food allergies.
Really? The worms? What, a worm?
The research they're doing is on pig whipworm.
When do they get their mouth with that supplement?
I've tried to get it, you can't get it. They won't let it in the country. So it's very interesting research.
So it sounds like you're saying the tap water issue is significant. And how then what specifically would you recommend doing there?
Well, I would recommend getting a filter installed in your kitchen countertop, reverse osmosis filter ideally, because that's going to produce fairly pure water. You got to change the reverse osmosis membrane every 6 months or so to keep bacteria from growing down there. So it's a little bit high maintenance system, but it definitely can produce some good quality non-chlorinated, fluoridated water. It can get all the pharmaceuticals out, can get, you know, a lot of the heavy metals out, and all the junk that's in our water supply. I mean, birth control, there's a lot of birth control compounds in our public water these days, you know, so it's the stuff we're getting from our public water supply is unfortunately not good. There's actually a fairly high level of nitrates in the water here in Olympia, which is an industrial fertilizer that is correlated with all sorts of issues when you consume water that's high in nitrates. So I definitely recommend you know, only drinking purified water. So I get my water down at the spring, down downtown on 4th and Jefferson there, and the city tests that water. I've seen the results that they posted up on their website. It's very low nitrates in that water, and there's no significant contamination in the spring water, which I tend to believe is energized and structured. So it's much healthier, much more hydrating water. There's
Do
also.
you store it in glass, or do you store it in plastic?
You know, you can store it in plastic, but you know, all plastic leaches chemicals. Even the BPA-free plastic leaches chemicals into the water that are not good for you. So I get the CustomPure.com company up in Seattle produces glass water jugs, 1 gallon, 3 gallon, and 5 gallon. So I take my glass 3 and 5 gallon water jugs down there to the spring every week and fill them up. They're not light, 5-gallon glass water jug full of water, you're talking 55 pounds or something like that. 3 gallons much more manageable, maybe 30 pounds. But, I'm not interested in drinking estrogen, which is what you drink every time you drink water out of plastic. And so I want to be healthy, so it's one of the things I do to... You're 70% water, right? That's the most important nutrient you're putting in your body. So definitely pay attention to your water and make sure it's pure and make sure it's good water. So there's also the co-op has a little water filter machine. You can fill up your water in those machines. That's very filtered with carbon block filtration and reverse osmosis. That's another option.
Well water, would you be okay using just one of the little faucet mounted, kind of like the pure filter breather or something, I think, or maybe just have it tested first before you?
Your well water, yeah, definitely get your well water tested, because well water can have all sorts of bacterial growth going on and microbes in there that are not ideal to be consuming. So yeah, you should get your well water tested before you drink it. And there are, the water systems that typically go on your kitchen counter are designed to handle tap water from the city. So they're not designed to handle microbial contamination that you get in well water. So if you want to get a filtration system that's going to filter your well water, it has to have a special add-on to deal with the microbial situation. So just be aware of that. Yeah.
Question. Getting back to some of these food allergies or sensitivities, so like with gluten, for instance, you were saying like there aren't any reliable tests, but with gluten, isn't the, whatever that test is the gluten or the transgluten?
Yeah, that's the...
or whatever that thing is, are those pretty
The proteins that people are reacting to in gluten, that's what they're testing for. So they're testing for antibodies for those proteins.
Yeah.
And, if they're testing for an IgE antibody, yeah, it's going to be pretty reliable. But if they're testing for IgG and some of the other ones, IgA, not necessarily super reliable. So, you want to do a food elimination diet to verify with, the best certainty that you can that you're sensitive to gluten. But frankly, I'm doing a book group here in March, I think March 25th, on a book called Wheat Belly. And if you read that book, you're going to come off gluten whether you're sensitive to it or not. There's so many issues with modern grains that are hurting you that are not even necessarily about the gluten.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you want to get healthy these days, coming off grains is one of the key ways to do it.
Yeah, even like rice, I've heard even like brown rice,
sure.
maybe you're cross, you have
rice,
reactivity with or something?
Yeah, rice and quinoa and amaranth and millet and buckwheat and teff don't have any gluten in them. So those grains are definitely better, because that's, one of the huge issues with grains is the gluten, and those grains don't have it. So they're definitely better, but those grains still have the tendency to spike blood sugar. They still have enzyme inhibitors and lectins and phytates, which interfere with your digestion and absorption of various minerals and damage your intestinal integrity. So you got to really prepare those grains properly by soaking them for a couple days or sprouting them before you cook them, so that they don't hurt you with all these anti-nutrients that they have in them. So, and honestly, grains are not necessary food. You can certainly eat grains if you enjoy them, if you're eating non-glutinous grains and you're preparing them properly, but you can get all the nutrients that grains are giving you from other places. You don't need to eat grains. And I can say that once you stop eating grains, you lose your taste for it slowly but surely, and you don't miss it. You just don't miss it at all.
Although they are a little bit, a little brown rice.
Yeah, and it's certainly not going to hurt you. I can work with people to help get them to the point where they're eating grains in a way that's relatively healthy and doing their body good. There's just a number of things to take into account to make sure that you got to basically prevent them from spiking your blood sugar and remove the anti-nutrients. And so you can definitely do that, but it's just easier. And also, when people's intestinal health is not good, you really should come off all grains, because grains, if your intestinal health and your digestion is not good, grains are going to feed your unfriendly microbes, whether you're sensitive to the grains or not, because grains are difficult to digest. If your intestinal ecology is not good, your intestinal epithelial cells are not secreting all the enzymes that accomplish the final stages of digestion of grains, so the grains never digest properly. And then they end up feeding unfriendly microbes and exacerbating that intestinal dysbiosis issue. So as part of a healing protocol, if somebody's got really a lot of intestinal issues, I have them come off grains completely. And they may be able to go back to grains once they're healthy in their intestinal ecology, if they choose. But as part of the healing protocol, I think it's important to come off grains if you've got intestinal issues for a time being, to let your intestinal tract heal and get back into balance. And then if you choose, you can start them up again, just in a way that promotes health and doesn't hurt you long term. So there's some things to take into account when consuming grains that are important.
Yeah, I guess the only one I really do is brown rice, and I thought that was real safe until I saw some information recently that said there's a high cross-reactivity with gluten. Yeah, with wheat. And
Totally. Grains are...
They say that's one thing you really need to go off of if you eliminate gluten and other grains and you're still reacting. So
Yeah. Grains are, you know, we never ate grains until like 10,000 years ago.
yeah.
Because, I mean, just imagine you're a hunter-gatherer, you're out, you know, you're gonna find like a quinoa field and just start picking quinoa and eating it.
Yeah.
You know, you might be able to get one little quinoa piece here, another little quinoa here. You might get like a little handful of quinoa in about 3 hours of work to eat, you know. So we really just didn't eat grains. It just we weren't able to get enough calories from them. And until the more modern agricultural techniques were developed, then we started eating grains. And some of us are more adapted to eating grains than others and can do okay with grains. But it's really wise to, you know, pay attention to the proper preparation of grains to reduce their potential for hurting you with all these anti-nutrients that they contain. So, yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
What about masa? It's a
Masa.
fermented corn.
Yeah, so fermented grains are way better because when you ferment them, you reduce all the anti-nutrients, and so that's good. But if the corn is not organically grown, it's going to be GMO corn, which is not a good idea. So yeah, just, you know, if you're doing fermented corn, that's way better.
It's not popcorn.
Yeah, as long as you don't have a corn sensitivity, and as long as you're eating organic fermented corn, and I would say that's not a bad food. So yeah, you can keep doing that.
Does that include the chips too?
Chips, not really a fan of. You know, I hate just like shredding food, you know, but you know, I'm not a fan of because chips are cooked with oil, and typically polyunsaturated oil. And when you cook polyunsaturated oil, you turn it into this super toxic soup of all sorts of rancid chemicals and various other free radical creating compounds that are not good for you. So not really a fan of chips for that reason. I mean, anytime, you gotta be really careful with your oils. Oils are very sensitive, especially the polyunsaturated oils. You can't really heat them, you can't expose them to oxygen, and those chips do both of those things simultaneously. So the oil in those chips is really not good for you. Definitely be kind to your liver and come off those chips. Learn how to make flax crackers, and you can make chips and dehydrated that don't have oil added that are not going to hurt your liver because the fat in there is going to be relatively healthy. But it means you got to buy a dehydrator and spend time making these chips. So that's a problem for some people. But yeah, and you know, when I started getting healthy and learned about all this stuff, chips was one of the hardest things for me to give up. I mean, because I love my chips and salsa, especially my blue corn. You know, one of the deceptions is, you know, these companies, you know, organically grown blue corn, you know, Garden of Eden, nice fancy label, non-GMO, and all this, you know, saying all the right things, you know. But meanwhile, you look at the ingredients, and yeah, it's way better than Fritos, because at least there's not artificial this and that in there. Yeah, but it's still, if you understand fat and you understand how fragile polyunsaturated oils are, and you see that they're baking these things in polyunsaturated oils, you're like, oh my God. You understand all the different chemicals that are formed when you do that are just wreck your liver. I don't want to say wreck your liver, but are really hard on your liver. So, you know, definitely not the ideal food. So.
Is there research being done on the relationship between these issues and mental illness?
Well, I think it's a huge issue. In fact, Evan just sent me an article a couple days ago about the relationship between food sensitivities and schizophrenia. And how there was one doc who basically his protocol was he put his schizophrenic patients on like this 4-day fast. And he noticed that the schizophrenic patients, all of them got significantly better on this like 4-day fast. And the ones that he then allowed them to go back to their regular diet, schizophrenia came right back. But the ones that he put on an elimination diet, their schizophrenia didn't come back. So he figured out that it was the food sensitivities that were really contributing to the whole schizophrenia thing. So we have this phrase called gut feeling, right? Acknowledging the fact that there's this huge connection between our gut and our brain. 90% of the serotonin in our body is made in our gut, not our brain. Serotonin is this feel-good neurotransmitter that helps you feel calm and relaxed and happy and content. So if your gut is out of whack, because you've got leaky gut, or you've got all these food sensitivities, or poor digestion, then that's going to dramatically affect the health of your brain. You know, these bacteria in your gut help to break down neurotransmitters, help to produce neurotransmitters, help to keep your whole body and especially your nervous system balanced. So it's absolutely critical to get your gut healthy. So anybody with any kind of depression, man, identifying and addressing food sensitivities should be a huge part of that protocol, because it's definitely affects your emotional, mental health big time.
Do you think, are probiotics, do you recommend probiotics along with elimination of a lot of these things to help keep the good bacteria in there, or not necessarily?
Yeah, probiotics are great, but you just remember that, you know, you can take you take probiotics from now until the cows come home. If your diet is this diet that is sending in all this stuff that's not digesting well, that's going to feed the unfriendly microbes, and you're just like taking this probiotic because you just want to be good in your intestinal tract, you know, those probiotics aren't going to be able to do you much good because you're consistently feeding the bad guys with your diet. And yeah, you're throwing in a few good guys there, but it's like throwing in this tiny little platoon against a massive army that you keep feeding with certain things that are in your diet. And you know, remember all these things on number 3, Roman numeral number 4, that contribute to poor intestinal ecology. So yeah, probiotics are good, but you want to combine your probiotic supplement with doing as many of these things as you can to help support healthy intestinal ecology. And then you're really going to notice a huge benefit from taking your probiotic, because your friendly bacteria are actually going to be able to get in there and implant properly and start to thrive, because the unfriendly microbes are dying off because you're not feeding them anymore. So yeah, probiotics can be good, but you know, it's like oftentimes people look for a magic pill to take away their pain without changing anything in their life. And in the case of intestinal ecology, it's really all about the diet. And the probiotic can really support bringing that back into balance, but it's not going to really do the job for you unless you're addressing all this stuff and your diet. So,
is it possible to get a list of you had said there were many things you had on an anti-inflammatory protocol. Is it possible to get a list?
Yeah, I mean, we could do something like that. I mean, you can come see me too, you know, and I could work with you on that level, but I can email you a list of something like that. So yeah, definitely. Just shoot me an email, Doug at drevan.com. Yeah?
You said heating oil is bad, cooking oil? I mean, is all oils bad to heat?
Good question. Yeah, certain oils are better than others. So saturated fat is the only thing I recommend cooking in. There's 2 oils that I think are good to cook in: coconut oil and palm oil. And they just started selling palm oil from a company called Nativa that is not damaging the rainforest in the process of producing this palm oil. A lot of palm oil these days is produced by just mowing down the rainforest to make way for palm trees. But this company has actually planted like 30,000 trees in this local community and to produce palm oil, and they're really working with bringing a community up from poverty that are doing some really good work. So really like that palm oil. Both coconut and palm oil are really high in saturated fat. They're therefore very stable, and therefore they respond to heat without degrading. So if you could find some corn chips that were baked in coconut oil, now we're talking. So yeah, totally. If I find any, I'll definitely we'll post that up on our Facebook page or something.
Well, is grapeseed oil is not?
Wouldn't recommend cooking with grapeseed oil. I see a lot of people recommending cooking with grapeseed oil. Don't do it. It's really high in polyunsaturated fat, high in omega-6s.
What about olive oil?
Olive oil is one of those oils that's definitely not ideal. It's sort of borderline. It's high in monounsaturated fat, which is not as unstable as polyunsaturated fat, but it's definitely not as stable as saturated fat. And if you fry with olive oil, you'll definitely get some significant toxicity happening in the olive oil. So just fry with coconut oil and then drizzle olive oil on the top if you're food again, if you like the olive oil. Yeah.
I guess maybe the temperature is the thing. Like I heat up the oil. I don't mean to fry. I just want to use it to help cook the vegetables and whatever else, for making like a masala or something like that.
Totally.
So it doesn't get the same temperature that like frying food does. It doesn't get to like 500 or whatever else.
Yeah, over 300 degrees is the problematic temperature.
Okay. So
Yeah, because when you get over 300 degrees, that's when a lot of these trans fatty acids and toxins start to form. But just know there are three things that degrade oils: light, heat, and oxygen. And when you fry, you expose the oil to all three of those things simultaneously. So it can really dramatically tweak your oil if you're frying for a long period of time at high temperatures. If you're going to fry, just do your best to just flash fry very quickly and use good saturated fat to do that. Butter could be another oil you could fry in. Butter tends to smoke a lot though, so I tend to prefer coconut oil and palm oil.
Somebody mentioned a detox program coming up.
Yeah, we're doing David Lerner, our acupuncturist here, our nutritionist as well, is doing a standard process cleanse protocol. So we're doing it as a community, and we're gonna, I'm sure, have stuff on Facebook about it and whatnot. So if you want to participate, you just come in and purchase a standard process cleanse, and we'll have some way we can all communicate with each other, probably on Facebook or something.
Is there any information? I mean, I haven't gotten anything in an email about that.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some classes or some get-togethers throughout. And we'll probably post, kind of what we're eating every day and that sort of thing.
So if you're not on Facebook, you're out of luck, huh?
I suppose, I don't know.
I've only seen one thing come out about it as well, so.
I'm sure, I mean, it's going to happen here like mid-March, so I'm sure pretty soon we'll start to get some info. There'll be a big email about it. It's coming soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't have Facebook, but I can see your guys' on Facebook page, so you don't have to be on Facebook yourself to actually see what you guys have got. At least that's what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how David's going to work it. I haven't talked to him about it, but I'm sure there's going to be some way. Probably, over the 3 weeks, we'll probably be able to meet, once a week or so. I don't know how he's going to work it. So I'm sure you're going to get an email about it soon. And if that's something you want, you could combine that with an elimination diet. Get your list here of foods you're sensitive to, mark off the big 6 that I talked about, and maybe do some pulse testing to try to figure out some other things you might be sensitive to. Get your list of things you want to put in your elimination diet, and do that concurrently with the standard process cleanse. And really, it's springtime. It's the perfect time to really be cleansing your body and really upgrading your health to, just open you up to the joy of summer. So.
What was that Black Lake Boulevard meat price you're talking about?
Yeah, it's I think 2010 South Black Lake Boulevard. You're on Highway 101. Get off Black Lake Boulevard and make a left. You go down there about half mile. It's on the left, right by a gas station.
Is that
Right by a sushi shop.
Local food? Olympia local food?
Yes, same place.
And
Great little
are others
business.
around here that are?
That's the only place I know of
meat
that.
places?
Yeah, it's the only place I know of that specializes in that. It's a great little business. I mean, they've got tons of great food in there. So, I really would love to see that business. That's the kind of business we should be supporting as a community and helping that business flourish.
What is it called again?
Farm Fresh Northwest.
And they have coconut wraps.
Coconut wraps. Yeah. I mean, you're like, oh my God, I'm sensitive to corn. My tortilla days are over. Not true. You can get the coconut wraps made out of nothing but coconut meat. in that market, and you just use them like a tortilla. They're very flexible, and so what a great little thing to wrap up some food for yourself. So,
I have a question about coconut oil.
yes.
So I've heard recently that the coconut oil that has fragrance to it actually is not for high heat. I haven't confirmed this, but I've been told that if you look at the container, it says, do not for cooking, or do not use on high heat. Do you know anything about
it may smoke. I mean, I don't fry, so I don't know. But possibly the coconut oil on high heat may start smoking, which people who fry like to avoid. There is a refined coconut oil that you can purchase that is basically designed to be used in cooking, and also because it's refined, it's had the coconut flavor refined out of it. It's pretty generic in its flavor, and that one I would imagine wouldn't smoke. Because what's smoking is some of the non-fat components in the coconut oil that are still left over. There's going to be something that gets in the oil that's not oil, that's not 100% fat, and that stuff will smoke and create weird flavors in your food, and possibly create some toxins, I would imagine, as those things, starches caramelize or whatever. So yeah, you certainly don't ever want to fry at a really high temperature, but I've seen people fry with refined coconut oil, and it didn't smoke and didn't really seem to cause any issues. So,
What's the difference between palm and coconut oil?
good question. Different kind of palm tree. Coconut oil is obviously from a coconut palm, and palm oil is from I think red palm they call it. The nice thing about palm oil, it's just neon red, and it's a solid, just like coconut oil at room temperature. It has the consistency of butter. It's a soft, solid, it spreads very readily. It tastes somewhat like butter, a little bit, not fully like butter, but a little bit. And the red is beta carotene. It's just off the charts in vitamin A, and vitamin A is the highest vitamin E of any oil that we know. So those are two very anti-inflammatory vitamins, and should be part of your anti-inflammatory protocol. So when you're doing an elimination diet, start eating that palm oil to help bring inflammation down in your body. And so yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking at the oil section at the co-op, it'll pop right out.
I
I
bet.
saw it the last time I was there, and I was like, whoa!
Yeah,
It's really strong color.
it is. It's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing that there's actually an oil that color.
Yeah.
Super cool.
I have a question on
Sure.
coconut oil, because I don't like the taste of coconut. I found some at super supplements that have, it says neutral taste on it.
That's the refined
That's
coconut oil.
my,
I think
is
Spectrum.
that's still okay?
That's still okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
it's-
somebody told me it wasn't, so.
No, it's fine. I mean, they just refine it. I'm not sure exactly what they do, but Spectrum is a good company, and they're refining it not with chemicals. I can guarantee that. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the process is, but that company is definitely a good company. So I'll find out what the process is. Yeah, if you shoot me an email at doug@drevan.com, remind me to. I'll respond with. Once I investigate what that process is, I'll respond just to confirm that it's good, that it's not going to hurt you. So.
Last question.
In an effort to reduce sugar, and not to use the artificial sweeteners, I started using some stevia. But I noticed that just recently, when I read the label of the package, that the first ingredient is dextrose and then stevia extract. So dextrose, isn't that just simple sugar?
Dextrose is it's sugar. I can't remember exactly what dextrose is, but it's a fairly simple sugar. It will spike your blood sugar. And it's pretty amazing to me that a stevia product actually, they put dextrose in it. That's just comical. I mean, that's a classic example of why you got to read labels these days.
And the liquid, I bought a bottle of the liquid drops, and it does not have, it doesn't have dextrose in it, and it took a lot more to create the sweetening power.
Totally.
You can buy straight stevia, if you look at the labels. There's a lot of it, especially organic. It's nothing else is in it but stevia.
Yeah, the co-op sells lots of stevia that is clean like that. And by the way, sugar is highly inflammatory, so low sugar should be part of a low anti-inflammatory protocol.
In an effort to use organic, if anybody has access to Costco, they have an organic thing going on right now, where they have a huge amount of organic products. So if Costco is someplace that you shop and you're interested in organics, it might do good to just take a run through there.
Cool.
Because I bought way more than I should in money value, but it's like, I gotta support them using organic products, so.
Yeah.
And I think it goes into early March.
Awesome. Good info. Well, thanks for coming, folks.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.